Hey guys, I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
Guys, today we're going to talk about brain health a little bit, and this is going to probably be a 2, maybe 3-part series. I'm not sure exactly how far we'll get into it because it's pretty important. I mean, the brain kind of controls everything.
Kind of important.
Yeah. But Dr. Hall is going to talk to us today about foods that are good for the brain, foods that are bad for the brain. And I think you'll probably learn something today. I know, I've got some friends whose parents are dealing with some things in the brain, and it's scary. So anything we can do to support normal brain function through eating certain foods and not eating others that may harm us, the better chances we have to live a very, very good life with less problems, I guess you could say. Dr. Hall, what do you got for us today?
Well, I was thinking way back when I was in school back in the 70s, over 50 years ago now, when I was taking human anatomy and human physiology. And I remember we spent so long on the brain, the anatomy, then in the physiology course in the spring, spent a long time on the brain and all the different functions and the way it controls everything. And I thought, good grief, finally got finished with it. And then it dawned on me, we didn't even talk about cognition, memory, all that. It was just all the physical things that the brain does. It controls everything, basically, and it's complex. It is the most complex part of the body, and there's just no getting around that. And I don't care what your IQ is, it's complex, and if you can function at all, your brain's really doing a lot. But it controls everything. Besides thought and memory and all that, it controls the way all of our senses, the way we feel, how we act and function, and the motor functions, and controlling temperature, hunger, thirst, everything. It just controls everything. And it is complex. It has about 100 billion neurons, or nerve cells, the brain does. And that's a lot. And one of the things that's changed when I was in school, of course, this is in the olden days, but in the olden days, back 50 years ago or so, we were taught, and more recently than that, hey, what you got is what you got. You can't grow any new brain cells. You can grow some peripheral nerves. You can cut a finger and some of the peripheral nerves will grow back, but boy, the central nervous system, what you see is what you got, and that's as far as it goes. And now we know, really they started learning it really sooner, but they started recognizing it in the 70s, about the time I was finishing up my education. That's not necessarily true. We can grow new neurons, and we can improve, and things can change. So they talk about plasticity and neuroplasticity, or brain plasticity, and plasticity is the term that they use for just it's able to function, it's able to change. And so the networks, the connections of the brain, and the way the brain grows and functions and is organized, it can reorganize itself to some extent. Now, it can't grow new neurons like we can grow new skin. I mean, I can cut out a hunk of meat, and I'll grow new skin cells. Well, we can do that pretty fast. We do not do neurons like that. But the idea that we grow no new neurons is false. We do grow new neurons, and we can improve things, and we can help make them get healthier too, and we certainly can make them get worse and all that. So that's what we want to talk about. There are a lot of things that are factored into it, but when studying the motor functions and all that, well, even thought process is a little bit different. It's more than just biochemistry. There's more to the mind than just physiology, and that's been proven. So I mean, it's not just physical stuff when we're talking about thinking. There's something more going on than that, and that's from the mind of God. But as far as motor functions and the things that with the body, then we're talking about electrical impulses basically. And so we have nerve cells that transmit impulses. We call them electrical impulses, if you will, and to the spinal cord and out to the peripheral nerves, or from the peripheral nerves through the spinal cord back up to the brain. So pain, for example, or the sense of touch or whatever. And we have neurotransmitters, so lots of different chemicals that are called neurotransmitters, because there are gaps. You have the end of one nerve cell and the beginning of another one. There's a gap there that has to be bridged. And so what happens is there are chemicals that transmit the impulse from one neuron across the gap, across that gulf to the next one. Those are neurotransmitters. There are about 100 that we know of, and probably more, but they've identified more than 100 different neurotransmitters. And we think of acetylcholine, we think of serotonin, are some of the common ones that most people have heard of anyway. And they're neurotransmitters. And that they're important. And so the brain produces them. We're going to talk later on in another video about the gut. And about the gut-brain axis, which is fairly new concept, and we're gonna get on that because that's a totally different subject. And but I want to talk specifically just pretty much about the brain itself and the central nervous system, and specifically about some of the nutrients that affect it adversely or in a good way. The brain is busy. It's about 2% of our body weight, and yet it takes up about 20% of our metabolic energy. It takes up a lot of energy. It's not just, it's sitting there, but it's not just sitting there. It's working.
So even when you're in la la land, it's still working.
Yeah, that's right. And it doesn't matter what your IQ is, it's still maintaining a lot of stuff going on. Probably your dad's burning up a little bit more than I a genius like him versus somebody like me. But still, all our bodily function, it's requiring 20% of our energy, which is fascinating when you think about all the muscle activity and all that. But it just takes so much energy to run that brain, and so that tells me something. We need food, but a lot of people think of food as fuel. Well, it is fuel, but food is so much more than fuel. It's the material that makes us. I mean, you are what you eat. Everybody's heard that. We are what we eat. We are what we drink. And I'm talking physically. We are what we drink, what we breathe in, what comes through our skin. Whatever we take in, and so it requires, for that brain to exist and function, it needs more than just energy, but that gives you an idea of what's going on. It requires 20% of our metabolic energy.
Wow.
And that tells you something. So neuroplasticity is a new concept. Neurogenesis is a fairly new concept. Again, the growth of new nerve cells, we thought that did not happen. It does happen. Not like other cells, but it does happen. And in fact, it has to happen. We now understand that has to happen for us to stay healthy, for our brains to still function. If that didn't happen, we'd all go have dementia eventually. You know, I mean, that's just the way it works. So it has to happen. We now understand that neurogenesis and the plasticity is required for the health of the brain, for the brain to work, and for the homeostasis and all that, and just maintaining the central nervous system requires neurogenesis, or the growth of new nerve cells. And so that's important to understand. And they talk about adult neurogenesis. Of course, there is neurogenesis in utero when we're being developed in the womb and all that, but adult neurogenesis is what we're talking about. And the hippocampus is part of the brain that is really important. It's important in memory and in thinking and all that. It's part of the limbic system, but a huge percentage of the neurogenesis takes place in that relatively small part of the brain called the hippocampus. And it's complex. It's a complex part of the brain. So learning and memory and all that's kind of the center of all that, and that's where so that's part of the learning process, and memory is neurogenesis and developing they always had theories about what's happening when we're learning when we learn something. And I remember when I was in school, they talked about, well, they think that when you learn something, there's folds in your brain and all. It gets a little bit deeper and all that. And I thought, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know really what it getting a little bit deeper does. Well, now we understand that part of learning is you're growing some new nerve cells. Sometimes that's helping with the learning and all that. And so, and that's the hippocampus, that part of the brain called the hippocampus. Okay, so brain health obviously is important, and of course we all understand what's going on these days. We hear about it. It's like cardiovascular disease or cancer. I mean, those two affect everybody, one way or the other, either our families or friends or somebody. Well, everybody knows somebody who's going through dementia or something. Every one of us does. So in that way, even if it's not a member of our family, it's affecting us because it's a friend or a friend's, somebody. And that's part of the deal. So aging process is a problem, as I can attest to for a fact. And there are a lot of things that kind of go with aging that aren't really fun. Inflammation. Aging is a pro-inflammatory deal, and so we just tend to have more inflammation, chronic inflammation. We talk about inflammation every time we talk about anything. Chronic systemic inflammation is a problem for everybody. Oxidative stress, and they go hand in hand, and we talk about antioxidants. But aging, and I promise you, I eat better than I used to when I was younger, and yet I'm dealing with, I'm doing things about it, but my inflammatory status and my blood work looks great. I just had a lot of blood work done recently, and C-reactive protein and my SED rate and all that real low and all that, but still, there's stuff going on, and just with the skin and everything. I mean, there's a little seborrhea, maybe a little bit of psoriasis going on that I'm dealing with. It just happens. And I'm eating healthier than I ever have, and I'm getting nutrients in me, but it's just a battle, Part of the aging process is inflammation. And inflammation is a problem for the brain too, just like it is everything else. It affects the brain. Chronic inflammation is destructive. Those C-reactive proteins and other chemicals that are produced as part of inflammation are destructive to the brain too. And so inflammation is an issue. Oxidative stress is. And we always talk about the two processes of autophagy and apoptosis. Autophagy is house cleaning. It's intracellular, it's in the cell. Proteins break down, organelles break down things, or something happens, and it breaks them down. Like if it's a protein, we'll break it down into its amino acids, clean all that mess up. But the other thing is that we'll recycle it and to make new healthy proteins and all that. If that can't happen, then we have apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, which sounds kind of bad, but it's good. I mean, we have to have that to stay healthy. And the example I always give is red blood cells. They have a 120-day lifespan. After 120 days, after 4 months, it's just about time for them to go. If they hang around, and other cells, skin cells, depending on how old we are, live for a few weeks. But after a while, it's time for them to go. If they hang around too long, they can get disease, they can get cancer and all that. So we have lots of different cells that have different lifespans, and so apoptosis is part of taking care of that, getting rid of those old cells that have lived their lives, and it's time for them to go.
To renew.
That's right.
That's what
And then
keeps us
autophagy
renewed.
is part of the renewal process, replacing it. There are lots of other processes too.
Oh yeah, that's just.
And there are a lot of processes, I guarantee you there are a lot of processes we haven't even dreamed of yet, let alone discovered.
That's because the brain cells haven't grown enough to discover
That's
that.
right. We have, well, mine hasn't. But mine hasn't. But anyway, and then when there's disease, if we have infection or something like that, we have a diseased or damaged cell that cannot be repaired, then we've got to replace it all this. So, and so oxidative stress inflammation all contribute to damaging cells, and that's where autophagy and apoptosis come into. And they all work together and all that to help. The idea is to help us stay healthy. So oxidative stress is known to suppress the proliferation of precursor cells and the migration and all that. So oxidative stress is known to adversely affect neuroplasticity, in other words, neurogenesis, the organization of that and all that. So oxidative stress is an issue for the brain, just like it is for everything else. Mm-hmm. Inflammation is. Aging is part of it. You can't do much about aging. I just keep getting older. Mm-hmm. I don't know. You do too.
But
you're not 8 years old either, like you were when I first knew you.
No.
I watched you get old too. So.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the way it works. But anyway, there are prices to pay, but there are things that we can do to help deal with that.
Oh.
So lifestyle factors. We got to get enough rest.
Mm-hmm.
We know the things. We need to get enough rest. We need to stop doing silly things. Mm-hmm. There are things that we do, too much alcohol, smoking.
Sugar's terrible.
But I was getting to diet, and then diet. Diets high in fats. Certain fats are good for you, but there are a lot of fats we're eating that aren't good for us. High in refined sugars, especially. Mm-hmm. That's
we've got plenty of that in America.
Yeah, we do. We're doing really well.
Yeah,
and even salt.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not so worried about salt. This is just an aside, but when I was in college, there are 3 colleges in Abilene, and in one of the colleges they're all church-related schools, and one of them at McMurray, which was a Methodist school, where they had a guy, this is back in the early 70s, and they had a guy visited from South America. He had been in one of the native tribes, and they were cannibals.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so, but he had been converted to Christianity, and he was up and he was talking and visiting and all this, and I remember this so clearly, somebody asked him, well, have you ever eaten Americans before? And the guy goes, we don't like Americans, they're too salty. Whether he was telling the truth, but I think he was telling the truth.
Oh my
because
goodness.
we eat more salt than we should.
Oh.
But I hadn't thought of that in a long time. That just made me think of that.
That's pretty funny.
But anyway, we're still probably too salty, most of us. So, we need to watch so there are things that we eat that can cause problems, that can affect neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, and just IQ and all that, and just the health of the brain and all that. So there are foods though that can help, and we've talked about the B vitamins. B12 is known to play a major role in proper brain development and function. And we've talked in the past about about being low on certain vitamins or minerals, and especially vitamins. And we talk about being way too low. And if you're really low, then you can have some diseases, So if you have a deficiency, then you can have some significant diseases. But they now talk about inadequacies, where you're not so deficient, but you're still a little bit low. Mm-hmm. Right here, they're talking about many clinical studies have shown that low normal, so you're in the normal range with B12, but you're on the low side of normal, is strongly correlated with cognitive impairment. Mm. So you can be in the normal range with B12, but they can measure the cognitive impairment because you don't have as much B12 as you should. So, in which I say, so much for low normal, so much for the normal part of low normal. You're just low.
Yeah.
B12, other B vitamins, folic acid, which is B9, and B6, and as well as B12, they've shown that when they supplement them, it improves cognitive function. We just tend to be low, and we don't think of ourselves, but we are. Most of us are a little bit low on a lot of the B vitamins, and a lot of the B vitamins are involved in brain health, producing producing neurotransmitters and just cognition and all kinds of things. And maintaining neurogenesis, the development and growth of new neurons and the neuroplasticity. So we're a little bit low on some of the B vitamins, and studies have shown that. They've shown that polyphenols and things like that, like blueberries and strawberries, have been shown to increase neurogenesis. Just eating blueberries and strawberries makes a difference on growth of new neurons in the brain. Okay, and then we get into some of the herbs and some of the things that you find in the store at dietary supplements like curcumin and polyphenols that are really important. Even polyunsaturated fatty acids. Those are fatty acids. Those are good for us and all that. But they've been shown to induce neurogenesis. And they have antioxidant. They all seem to do the same. All the good foods generally do the same thing. And I've said this before. They seem to all have antioxidant effects, anti-inflammatory effects, and they help support proper autophagy and proper apoptosis, because these are important, but they can be abnormal, and that can be a problem too. So curcumin, gotu kola, astragalus, or however you want to pronounce it, and some of these others. There are a lot of other things that you can, nutrients that you can find in dietary supplements. If you're actually getting them, which is a question when you go to the store, you never know what you're getting, unfortunately. But anyway, when you do the studies with the actual nutrients, have shown that it makes a big difference in neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, cognition, memory, and all of that. So, and again, food plays into gut health, and we're going to talk about that in another video, because that's a whole different story, but gut health is important. And the gut-brain axis, or the gut-brain microbiota axis, is important. And we're going to talk about that because that's fascinating. The gut's involved in everything. And some people think gut is a proper term, by the way. Some people think it's being offensive and kind of crude, but it's not. Gut is a scientific term. That's what we call it.
Well, I have a gut feeling it's probably going to be a good video.
And there is something to the gut feeling. Now they can explain the gut feeling. It's real. The gut feeling is real. It's tied into the nervous system and all that, and the brain. So anyway, we'll talk about that later. But the bottom line is, like always, there are certain things we can't do much about, but we can avoid bad habits. We can try to avoid the bad foods. And it's real simple. The foods that are bad for this are bad for that. It's real simple. I mean, when I was in dental school, it was real. I figured it out. They were always talking about what was bad for the teeth and the mouth and all that. And it was always the same foods that were bad for everything else too. So if they're bad food, they're bad food.
Yeah.
Just generally speaking. If it's good food, it's good food. It's good for this part of the body, it's good for everything. The foods that are good for the rest of the body are good for the brain. So it's those foods that we need. So getting the right nutrients, getting enough vitamins and minerals. We're all low on the fat-soluble vitamins. Everybody's low on fat-soluble vitamins. We've talked about that before. And we're not getting so many of the nutrients that we need in our Western diet because they tend to be bitter. We don't like the way they taste. We like the way food tastes. Food that tastes good generally is not good for us, unfortunately. It's just the way it works. But anyway, nutrition is really important and has a direct effect on the brain health and brain function. And so they've done studies. They show that getting the right nutrients can help delay the breakdown and help delay dementia. Actually, they've seen a little bit of reversal in things like memory and all that too. So
awesome.
Getting the right foods, and that comes back into neurogenesis.
That comes back into the cells replacing the cells.
So getting the right foods, avoiding the bad foods, getting the right foods is really critical. And those are things we can do. We just have to make up our minds to do it.
You know, guys, I hope that this helps you out. I mean, and that just gives a little bit of hope to those that may think that it's too far gone or whatnot. I mean, the brain can heal itself. I mean, that's an amazing thing to think about. I do want to put a little disclaimer in here now. Dr. Hall mentioned gotu kola. That has nothing to do with any type of soda. We do not condone you drinking sodas. They cause inflammation with all the sugar in them. No, Coca-Cola is one of those bitter things that Dr. Hall is talking about that don't taste good.
Yeah,
but
there's
they
a
have great
cola with a
nutrients.
K.
Oh, okay. See, they even spelt it different to help lower the confusion.
Yeah.
But anyway, guys, I hope this helped you. Until next time, I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
This is for the health of it.